Well, Dr. Andrews, thank you so much for being here. I know I, for one, am fangirling. I hope that's okay to say because I was so excited to talk to you. This is a topic that's really close to my heart and something that I'm really interested in and that I think our industry really needs to hear more about and really understand more. So tell me a little bit, how did you begin giving these talks and the conversations? And you're so informative. You know everything, it seems, to know about DE&I. And give me a little background on that.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. Love the question. Thank you. So my dissertation research was actually on leadership, gender barriers that women, while we still have a leadership gender gap even today, 21st century, and what are the barriers that are contributing to that gap that many women and also some men experience. So it started there. Okay. So I analyzed all the barriers, did the research, conducted the interviews, wrote a book about it in 2018. And so I originally started talking about leadership and gender, but that topic actually rolls up under DEI. Okay. So DEI is the big umbrella where you have gender, race, age, ethnicity, LGBTQ. Yeah. So there's many topics that roll up under that. And so initially I was speaking a lot on women in leadership, teaching courses and doing workshops. And then actually COVID. Actually, I would say not COVID. Before, it was George Floyd was actually the catalyst for I started pivoting, and because I realized because of the George Floyd incident and subsequent incidences that whole year, I think it was 2020.
Yes.
That whole year, I'm watching and I just saw gaps, and I developed a presentation specifically on DEI, and then I went on specifically on biases. Yeah. So how to address, why we're biased, how to address it from both an individual and organizational level. And then DEI was a separate presentation. So what is DEI? What are microaggressions? And then I weaved in psychological safety after that. So it's morphed into more of a DEI. I still speak about women in leadership. I speak to a lot of women's groups still, but I do a lot of talks on DEI bias topics, and it's because there's a need, frankly.
Yeah. There obviously is a need, right? Yeah. And I love the way that you are able to educate people on all of the intricacies of this topic, but not make it feel overwhelming or scary. And I think sometimes that can be really hard when we're thinking about the businesses, especially multifamily, how they take that very first step. So maybe they've acknowledged that this is something that they want to begin, or their first part of the journey. What's the best advice you would give to our leaders in multifamily of, here's where you start on your Monopoly board. Here's your step one. Yes. What is it that you would want?
Yes. So to your point, oftentimes companies don't know where to start. Yeah. The good news is there's more of a desire to be more diverse and inclusive from many companies out there. But most companies don't know what to do, or they're focusing on the wrong issue or just one little piece of it and not the broader picture. Yeah. So most companies are not fully leveraging, are not fully being diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Yeah. So these topics, you have to play the long game, right? And you have to have the intentionality, but also the will to do hard things, because it's not always easy to address biases in ourselves and others. And then it's not always easy to be, fully inclusive in the work environment. So where do you start? It's a great question. So just starting the dialogue is the best way to do it. Even having, maybe your first forum or your first meeting around DEI topics and ask your employees how they feel. But even probably a better way to do that, and probably a more efficient way, is I recommend doing an engagement survey. Okay. So you can create a survey asking a number of different issues around engagement, but within that, you can include 8 to 10 questions around DEI specifically. So for example, regarding diversity, do you feel that your team is diverse? Do you feel leadership at this company is diverse? Yeah. Do you feel that the recruiting process that you went through is diverse and embracing of diversity.
Yeah.
So you could have a couple questions around that. The equity piece, you can ask, do you feel that you have equal access to opportunities that your colleagues do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the same, access to resources? Do you feel that the environment you work in is fair?
Mm-hmm.
Do you get a sense of fairness?
Yeah.
So you could have a couple questions around equity. And then the inclusion piece speaks to the culture. Do you feel included on your team? Do you feel included working at this company?
Mm-hmm.
Are you engaged in your job? Because they tie closely together.
Yeah.
Engagement and inclusion. You can also even ask around belonging. Do you feel like you belong here?
Yeah.
Do you feel that your ideas are valued? Do you feel listened to? Do you feel respected? So these questions are all great. And I just threw out that was like 7 or 8 right there.
Yeah, those are amazing.
So right there, you can get a really good sense of what your employees are seeking from a DEI perspective. Then the next part is actually look at those results, talk about them, not only among your leadership teams, but also with your employees.
Yeah.
That would be a great place to start, because you could say, we've surveyed the employees across different departments and functions. Here's what the employees are saying. We want to share this with you. And you could do, I don't know, maybe a town hall or a company meeting, put it in your newsletter. But there's a number of different ways that you can communicate this out and really open a forum where you could start the dialogue.
I think that's such a good way to say, here's exactly how you can take this first step and just get an understanding of where your strengths are, maybe where some weaknesses are, what you're doing well, and where you can move the dial a little bit. It's fantastic.
And those would be great questions too.
Okay.
What's the company doing well from a DEI perspective?
Yeah.
What could we be doing better?
Yeah.
I love it.
Because we don't always see, right? We just like everyone else, that's part of this whole thing, right? You see from your own viewpoint, and you maybe don't see the other things that you haven't understood or noticed before. So I think it's fascinating too to think about. I would hope that every leader of every company calls you and says, what do we do, Dr. Andrews? Tell us how to do this. But if that's not the case, what is it that you should do as an employee or as a upper level leadership or even as an executive if you want to try to help encourage this conversation?
Yeah.
Give me some tips there for our listeners. How can they encourage this to get started if maybe they're not the one in charge?
Yeah. So the first point is, actually, I do consulting to companies. Yeah. Perfect. That's one of the things, and I actually didn't mention that earlier, but I talked about different levels of inclusion. Yeah. When you look at the literature and academia and what's been published about DEI, there's 4 levels. And level 1 is diversity or DEI within the company itself. Yeah. So but within that, you have about 10 different topics to address. Yeah. So I consult to companies on actually all the levels, but primarily level 1 inclusion. So, exactly how do we go about accountability? Yeah. How do we go about our policies and benefits and procedures? How do we go about, how do we analyze our recruiting and hiring processes? Or how do we start our first ERG? That's another common one. Yes. I've helped a couple companies start their very first ERGs. So this whole process, as we talked about earlier, it's not easy, but there are a number of things you could do and a number of resources out there to get started. And so I do help companies on exactly how, because the how part
is the hard part.
Yeah, is the hard part. We know the why.
Yeah.
We know it's the right thing to do. We know that it's what most employees are seeking nowadays. It's a top value. DEI is a top value. But yet we're not doing it, as I mentioned, most companies don't do it well. Yeah. So there's a lot that we can do to help companies get there.
Absolutely. So I do have a question. I feel like, we should do things because they're the right thing to do. But I also am curious, when you have worked with companies or as you've seen this change, hopefully you've seen a lot of change in the positive, what was the other positive impacts for the companies that maybe were early adopters of embracing a more diverse work culture? Or tell me a little bit about that, because I do think it's good to remind our industry that, hey, we want to do this because it's the right choice, but also there's some benefits. What are those benefits?
Yes. So, the benefits are numerous, and there's lots of data out there. I mean, we have several, years now, if not decades, of diversity reporting and data to back up the benefits of DEI. Some being engagement improves, innovation and creativity shoots up. When you have diverse perspectives at the table, someone's going to say something you may not have heard of before. So, we can't undervalue the value in diverse perspectives. So innovation, creativity is impacted, engagement goes up, retention goes down. People feel more included. They feel that they belong more. So there's a whole host of benefits that companies reap. And even looking at the bottom line, ROI, return on equity, return on investment, overall revenue has shown, and companies that are more diverse have financial benefits compared to companies that are less diverse.
I love to see that.
So,
I love it. I know one of my favorite books that I read with my daughter, who's 8, is called What's an Idea Worth? And that just made me think about, I often think about that, how many ideas or different viewpoints are we missing out on when we don't have a more diverse culture or a more diverse workforce? I can't even imagine. I don't know if you recently saw the movie about the guy who came up with the idea for hot Cheetos, but incredible idea, right? And it was because he was like, hey, we like spicy things and this is a great thing. And so what was that idea worth if he had not had a voice at the table? What they would have missed out on. That's I believe Frito-Lay's #1 product in the world is, spicy Cheetos. So anyhow, I love the idea that if we just take these steps, we can see improvement and we can see what's going well. What are kind of the next steps? So maybe you have a company that says, okay, I've started doing these things. We've done the surveys, we've figured out kind of where we are, but we're more of a master's level now. What would you advise those companies to start with? Yes.
So, and your question prompted me to think about the companies I've consulted to. 2 companies. One is a startup cybersecurity company.
Okay.
Male-dominated industry, and their goals was not only overall diversity and inclusion, but it's so male-dominated and primarily Caucasian, and so they wanted more diversity in their hiring and in their workforce, and so I worked with them the first step actually we did is create a DEI committee from employees from different departments, so good cross section of employees. And the committee is generally 10 to 12 people, and we met monthly. And so I facilitated those calls. I provided examples of what's worked for other companies, what they're doing. So over the course of a year, so we had a DEI committee for a year, and then I usually worked with HR or usually HR primarily, folks in HR, or maybe there's a diversity manager or something.
That'd be great.
That'd be great if you have it, but it's usually HR folks that I work with too. And we usually have an executive sponsor and then a couple HR folks that are my key points of contact, and then a committee. And so this committee, so we talk about for our company, what is the most relevant thing to tackle first.
I love that.
So it may be recruiting and hiring. That may be, one subcommittee that we create. And so that group, let's say they're a group of 3 or 4 people. What they're supposed to be doing is research, due diligence on their specific topic, and then they come back and make recommendations and present to the broader committee about what we have, what we need, and how do we get there. And so these are recommendations. And so you could have a few subcommittees on different inclusion topics.
Okay.
And then at the end of the year, you have all these recommendations, and then the HR and leadership can look at those and say, okay, of these, we're going to action, this, this, and this, and then move forward on those. And so before you know it, you are implementing tactics towards DEI. And so that's what I've done with the cybersecurity company. I also work with the construction company.
Okay.
Not a startup, bigger company, but very male dominated as well. And they had very similar goals. So I did a similar process with them. And so that's actively going on. And then I'm working with a pharmaceutical company as well. But that process has worked really well because you have to play the long game. When you're not going to become diverse and inclusive overnight, right? You have to, but having a strategic kind of a systematic process helps you get through it. And eventually what happens is we can start moving the needle a little bit, and your culture starts becoming more diverse and inclusive in your company. Yeah. So, communications are going out about what the committee's doing, and employees are starting to see different initiatives. And so people are starting to feel now DEI and really see a change. So
I love that the idea here is something that seems so simple, but then ends up not always being that way in execution. But it also is interesting to me that, wow, you mean we just ask people and they'll tell us, And I know it doesn't work out that basic, but I just can't help but hear that. Like, yes, let's ask. Let's find out how we're doing. Let's find out what people would recommend. It's just a really interesting thing to think about, that it's right there.
And they'll tell us.
They'll just tell us.
But, that's true, but it's the process.
Yeah.
And most companies don't know the process. Right. And what's the right process for them.
Yeah.
And what have other companies done that's worked, And so bringing all that together helps them create a DEI plan that works for them.
Yeah.
In each company, one thing I found in doing this work is every company's different.
Yeah.
And they all have a very different culture. And so you have to, work with leaders and HR and employees within that company to really find initiatives that's going to work in that culture.
Well, as a nerd or geek or whatever I self-proclaim myself, I love books and podcasts and things like that, or any resources. And so I'm always curious. We've talked a lot about from a company standpoint and making a different culture. But if you're a person and you want to just start to figure out to learn more about this topic, like I'm just Chelsea, and I want to figure out a little bit more about where should I start? What do you recommend resource-wise? Do you have your favorites?
Oh my gosh, there's so much out there nowadays. There's a lot of great books around inclusion and DEI. There's great TED Talks.
Yes.
There's a number of great TED Talks on that. Actually, I did one this year.
Amazing.
Actually, just a few months ago.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you.
A bucket list dream of mine is to be on the TED
Me too.
stage, so I'm
Me
so
too.
proud of you.
I was actually trying for 10 years to do a TED Talk. And for your listeners out there, I don't know if anyone's ever interested in this or ever done one, but it's not easy because there's a very limited amount of slots for each TEDx, and they have certain themes, and you have to fit just perfectly into the timing of that theme and so a lot of it's a timing thing. But so after 10 years of trying, I finally did a TED Talk, and the topic actually is relevant to this conversation, which is why I'm bringing it up. The topic is called Debunking Bias, Perceptions of Male and Female Leaders. Yeah. So I specifically looked at not only, of course, biases and perceptions, but things we can do, to address our perceptions and biases towards leaders. And I even started with, I'm a drummer. Yeah. And so I started that TED Talk. I had my snare drum and a stand set up on stage ahead of time. And I walked out and I got the audience clapping. And then I played the drums. I didn't say a word. I just played the drums to their clapping.
Love it.
And I flipped my sticks, and then I stopped, and then they all clapped. And then I launched right into a story about personal biases of what I've experienced my whole life as a female drummer.
I can imagine.
Yes, right, because it's not that common in a female drummer.
Yeah.
So that's in the TED Talk. And so that, for example, is on YouTube. There's a TEDx YouTube channel. Okay. So you could either go to the TEDx YouTube channel or TED.com itself. Okay. There's a number of great videos on just DEI topics in general.
I just always love to give people, I call them little breadcrumbs, right? Like, this is the trail we want to follow. Like, let's just start here. If it's on your personal journey of understanding this topic more, I think it's so important. Well, I appreciate you and all of this good information, because it's so important that we talk about it. It doesn't have to be the elephant in the room. I think we just have got to acknowledge what we can do, and that we can all do a little something, and hopefully a lot of some things to make it better. Yeah.
Well, it's been an elephant in the room for quite a while, but the elephant's getting bigger. Yes. And data shows consistently, even now more than ever, that there's a study recently that I saw that 80% of potential employees look for DEI companies that are have DEI in their website, in their mission statement, in their culture, in their messaging, even in their products, that value DEI, and if that's not, they don't see that, they move on to another company. So it's become even more important, and it's not going away if you look at global trends. So especially our younger generations, now Gen Z is in the workforce. And so they really, that's one of their top 5 values.
Wow.
Is DEI. And so they truly are looking for that. So the bottom line for companies is if you want to attract top talent, diverse talent, making DEI a priority will help do that.
Well, it sounds like it's a great plan, especially, going into the future for them to be sure that this is something that isn't falling off the radar. I know we just briefly touched on it before we started chatting, but that unfortunately when we start to see a shift in the economy, or when we think that maybe profits are not where they need to be, that one of the first cuts that we've seen is in marketing or in then DE&I. So we see the chief diversity officers let go, and this seems to be the thing that companies default to say, well, maybe we don't need this anymore, or we already did it. We checked the box. We're good now. So what would you encourage them to do?
Yes. Thank you for the question, Chelsea. So in the last couple of years, it's been, actually, I wrote an article about this recently, that it's been a tough year for DEI.
Yeah.
Last 2 years, but this year in particular, 2023. So a number of states, have been aggressive in anti-DEI bills, right? And then what happened in around June of this year is the Supreme Court banned affirmative action in college admissions. But that caused a ripple effect in the DEI space. So that happened, and then what we saw, and there's a great Harvard article about this, that what happened is immediately following that is attorney generals from 13 red states sent letters to the top 500 companies in their states, telling them that per the Supreme Court decision, that DEI initiatives are now unlawful.
Oh.
And that is not true.
Right. Yeah.
So if you check with EEOC, which is the body that regulates diversity reporting for companies, it is absolutely legal and lawful for companies to have DEI initiatives. So that was miscommunication. That was not factual. The other thing that's happened is there's about 30 anti-DEI bills that have been pushed through in states. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, the chief diversity officer role in the last couple of years has been downsized or eliminated, and companies I've also seen starting to change language from DEI specifically to something else, like even like equity, focusing more on like equity and wellness, and not DEI. So there has been a bit of a backlash this year, but now is because the data I shared with you about people really valuing DEI, and the data backs that up, is now is not the time to back away from DEI, because it's doing a disservice to people who care about this topic. And so now is the time to reassess where you're at as a company, to recommit to DEI, and to move forward. And I'm finding that following the Supreme Court decision and this backlash, I did see pullback from some companies. But I have now started to see companies recommitting and moving forward. So majority of companies are sticking with it. I think some companies have kind of straddled the line a bit, about how do we address this, depending on what state you're in as well, affects that. But overall, companies are moving forward still and recommitting, because I think most companies do see the value in DEI, and they just need help getting there.
And I think you do such a great job of helping to educate people and companies, and not to be a complete cliche, but I love the thought and the quote of, when you know better, you do better.
Yes.
Right? So you're out there doing the work to help people to know better, so that hopefully they will do better.
Absolutely. That's a Maya Angelou quote, by the way.
Yes, I love her very, very much. And just love her writing and everything. But so thank you. Thank you for educating us and educating our audience and being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.